odd because I would say that Kyle's was clipping, so it may just be local conditions.
I actually figured that you were dropping a little bit from because of your internet connection. That was my assumption, but it's so minor that I wouldn't worry about it. You're perfectly audible.
Yeah, let's not discuss Ethernet today. That was the other technical challenge of the morning. That we're just going to say that Apple needs to figure out their USB-C implementation again and leave it at that.
All right. So shall we get started, I guess?
Yeah, have we succeeded in finding a volunteer for the taking of notes?
I do not see anyone yet, so I guess we got to shake the tree. We can't move forward with the meeting until we get a minutes taker.
Yeah, I volunteered.
Thank you, Jake. Except when you're speaking. Oh wait a minute, you're not. Are you speaking or no?
Yes, or unless you've handed off to.
I am speaking. I am. This one is less involved, I hope. Well, yeah, actually, if you could cover notes while, if there's any questions that come my way, that would be helpful. Thank you. Okay. And Mike says so too. Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes, and everyone is free to please go in and work with the notes as we go to help fill in the blanks as useful and necessary, and take a little load off of Jake. But thank you, Jake. All right. So I guess we should note the note well. Reminding everyone not only about the patents requirements and the requirement to declare any knowledge of IPR and encumbered technologies, which I doubt we'll actually wind up covering a whole lot in this discussion, but that is still an IETF requirement. And any discussions here can and will be used as part of the IETF proceedings. And in particular, I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the fact that we do have a code of conduct, and the URL is on the slide for the code of conduct and how to contact the ombuds team if you believe that you've had, if you feel you've had an issue with improper conduct at the IETF. I think hopefully that's a reasonable covering of the note well. Kyle, anything else you'd like to surface in the?
I mean, I would just say that regarding the code of conduct and harassment, just treat your fellow participants with respect and don't be an asshole, and things will probably be fine. So,
great.
All right, next slide.
Yep. So we have a pretty straightforward agenda this morning. We've already managed to get through all of the admin, hooray. We do have some extra industry updates from Glendine and Sanjay this morning, a couple of updates on the working group docs, and then some interesting other work going on within the IETF. And then it seems a valuable time to take a look back over the last 2 years of the MOPS working group. My goodness, has it been 2 years already? And talk a little bit more about where we have been and where we might go from here. So unless anyone would like to bash that agenda, I think we're ready to go. Not seeing or hearing any bashes.
Oh, Glenn?
Yep. No. Glenn is up.
Bash free. Wow. That's awesome. Are the presentations loaded up into MeetEcho?
Yes, I did that at like 10:46.
Oh, I love it. Just in time. Just in time presentations. Perfect. The question is, how do I do that again?
Well, no, so I have to stop sharing, I think.
Okay.
But yeah, so you're up. So it's at the top. It's the yeah. Okay.
There we go. And then let's see, update, share. because sharing is caring. All right. It's been a long IETF week. I apologize for having gone there. Hey, I'm Glenn Dean, and I'm here to talk about a presentation that Sanjay Mishra, who also is on the session, and Jason Thibodeau from the Streaming Video Alliance have put together. We've done a series of these, and Sanjay and I usually hand off back and forth on who's doing it, and this IETF was my turn. So here I am. And we're going to talk about what's been going on at the Streaming Video Alliance, also known as the SVA, since we last met. And I'll feel free if you want to jump into the queue and take questions, like little clarify questions on particular slides along the way. If not, we can talk at the end of this. So the SVA has been pumping a lot of work recently. It's been a very productive 2021. Despite what we've all been facing, and the way the SVA is organized is very much like the IETF. We're divided up into working groups that focus on particular areas. We have focuses on security, privacy, augmented reality, VR, live streaming, and caching, things like that. And so when I go through this deck, a lot of it's going to be sort of topic focused, and then on to the next topic, and it's sort of organized by working group. So the first thing I want to highlight is we have released a test bed now for the Open Caching API. So those who are familiar with Open Caching from the SVA, there's a linkage across pollination here going on with the Open Caching at IETF, Open Caching at SVA, and the CDNI working group over at IETF. In fact, Sanjay is involved in both, especially at the IETF as one of the co-chairs. And so we've been developing these APIs at the SVA around Open Caching for several years now, and we've now put together a test bed to allow people who are trying to adopt those APIs to actually exercise against them and check to see if where they meet compliance. So that's been up and rolling. We also have some configuration APIs. They were so awesome we had to split them into 3 documents. So there they are. This has actually been a considerable amount of work going through that group to create these configuration APIs, and it's really meant to be sort of a companion to the rest of this work we're doing around caching and availability. Next up, we had a live streaming POC, and a couple of these slides are going to talk about POCs that were going on. One of the things the SVA does above and beyond working on sort of APIs and specs and best practices is, we're sort of, I guess you could say, where the industry meets the specifications. Because in the room, we have a lot of people who do technical specifications and architectures and product. But we also have a lot of people in the room who are actually deploy centric and content delivery centric. So in the end, we have this great opportunity to bring together the people doing the specifications with the people doing the deployments, and allowing us to sort of, let them do some proof of concepts to say, well, does this architecture we've all put together across the IETF, across SMPTE, across other orgs like SCUDDY, and at the SVA, does all that come together in a meaningful way? And what can we learn from that to feed back into all the various organizations that are contributing? And so we put these POCs together. We've got a couple that will come up in the decks here, but in particular, the live stream POC has been active. They've got some links here that you can go off and follow. In particular, they've been working on measuring latency in AVR streaming. And so that's very much a great example of putting together the specifications we've all been working on. AVR has been around for a few years, but latency, reducing that, especially for live streaming for things like sports, are huge right now in the delivery industry. And so this POC brings together that exercise and says, well, are we at the right, going the right way? Are we going the right direction? Is there things missing that we need to take back into our development work, into our specification work, and expand on? Another POC we have is all about latency in streaming VR. So you're going to see a theme here. A lot of these things is latency, latency, latency. And a big part of that is if you look at the content industry, there's been this shift in the last few years. When we started MOPS even 2 years ago, the big focus was very much on delivering of pre-recorded content, or stuff that was from files. Often in the industry we call this VOD, video on demand, and that's what we've been doing. When we watch a movie, we're watching video on demand, and we've got it pretty well done. But one of the things that you can be very tolerant of in a VOD setting is latency. You don't care if the movie is starting up half a second later, or a second later, or 2 seconds later. You're very tolerant because it's a recorded film. On the other hand, if you're watching live sports, you want to make sure that the events you're seeing on the screen are as close to live as possible. And this is sort of the new big challenge in front of the streaming world. It's how do we reduce that latency so that that experience is as close to live as possible. And so that applies to live streaming, it applies to VR. Everything we're doing is trying to bridge that that gap between what you end up with on your screen and on your goggles and what happens in the real world. And so you're going to see that sort of a repeating theme in this deck, but also as we go forward with specifications and work. That's a big focus area in the industry. We also have a distributed request tracing. This is another way for us to tell how well the system is working end to end as part of the QE experience. And of course, you can make things very fast and very low latency, but you can do it by shaving off quality. And that's not good, especially when we're talking about things like live sports. Quality in sports is something that viewers demand. And so part of the QE experience work in the distributed tracing framework is to actually start looking at how do we collaborate end to end and collect all that data so we can understand when it's working, when it isn't working, and why it isn't working. And so if you're interested in that space, and I think there's real overlap with some of the IETF stuff, please go check out this link, and you can see what that project is doing. And then something that's probably pretty relevant to the IETF, Quick for video streaming. Now that we have Quick published as a specification, yay. There's been a lot of conversation at the IETF around Quick for streaming. We have mock, which is meeting and discussing the aspects there. Well, the SVA as well has been taking a look at Quick, and looking back at some of the notes, when we did an update from the SVA to the IETF a couple IETFs ago, one of the comments we made was, we're looking at Quick, but we didn't have any clear plans to pick it up and start deploying it at scale as a delivery infrastructure, as an industry. And one of the things we identified in asking the question, well, why is that? Was that, there's a couple of big shifts going on here, right? Obviously, shifting to Quick's UDP infrastructure away from the TCP-based infrastructure that the delivery guys all know and have instrumented really well is a big challenge. And it's retraining, it's developing some new tools, it's new ways of looking at the problem space, and it's also understanding how this all comes together with the expectations of the old, the expectations of the new, and what tools and infrastructure we have to support it. And so one of the things the SVA has decided to do is to create a POC that is going to build both a reference architecture for testing the environment, but try to tease out the details of how do you do that instrumentation and how do you do the metrics collection from end to end so that you can actually evaluate Quick compared to your current delivery environments, evaluate Quick, what it looks like compared to that, but also how you can then start exercising some of the more advanced features of Quick that aren't available in the old world. And so ultimately the goal here is to build a reference evaluation platform that the broader industry can take and make use of, so they don't themselves have to sort through things. So in practical terms, what have we done? So one of our first things we've been working on is looking through all the myriad of Quick server implementations that are out there and try to create a set of criteria. Well, why would you pick one over the other? And what features are you looking for in a Quick server implementation? And how would you then do instrumentation that connects in with the tool sets you already have as part of your delivery environment? Likewise, we're looking at the player side, how you connect with a player that supports Quick, and how do you instrument properly, and then how do all the pieces in the middle come together in a coherent way. And the idea behind this POC is it will start publishing at each of its 5 phases outputs that the SVA members and the broader industry can take a look at and make use of in their own evaluation of Quick. So hopefully this helps bridge that gap between, I want to play with it, and I now have touched it, played with it, I now understand it, and I can start figuring out how it fits into my architecture. And also, one of the big goals here is to be able to bring back to the IETF real life experiences around this to say, well, here's what worked, here's what didn't work, here's some things we think directions we may want to suggest going in to improve things. And in bringing it together here, so if you need to get a hold of any of us, I'm Glenn Dean, I'm NBC Universal and Comcast. There's my email. We have Sanjay at Verizon, and we have JT at the streamingvideoalliance.org. And with that, are there any questions? Kyle, are you guys managing the queue, or do you want me to manage the queue?
Oh, we're managing the queue. I'll manage it, I guess. So go ahead, Jake.
All right. Okay, good. Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I wanted to ask about some of the documents in the SVA look like they're available for free download. I'm not sure about the distribution policies. Like, obviously, the IPR and copyright kind of constraints are quite different than in the IETF, and I was curious, just sort of, how much of this work do you anticipate bringing to the IETF and kind of getting it into the more, clear space, and how much of it is like, do we have to ask our lawyers before we should get involved and whatnot?
Well, the official answer, as we both know, is always you must ask the lawyers for everything, because engineers aren't allowed to make decisions like that. But so the work of the SVA really can be divided into a couple categories, right? One of them is sort of technical specifications. Those may contain IP-related stuff, and if you're an SVA member, part of joining the organization is, of course, agreeing to the IP licensing rules, which really focus on providing licenses to other SVA members if they want to negotiate with you. And it's not, the SVA, unlike the IETF, isn't essentially, as open a IP policy. It's very flexible. If you're a member, if you're an outsider, it's different, right? But that's for the specifications and the really technical stuff. Or the things like PLCs, best practices, and white papers. Those are things which do not typically contain any IP-related assertions or materials, because they're looking at the industry level and they're looking at the technology level that's available across the open industry. Like, so Quick would be a good example, right? We're not building a Quick server at the SVA. We're not putting SVA member, IP into that Quick server. We're taking stuff that's already out there that's available off the shelf, typically open source, and taking it in and making use of it and documenting how we made use of it. So that stuff's all available and will be available when published to the outside world. You can just go to the SVA website, click on the download. It does the standard thing where it asks you to, I think, register your email address so we know who you are, and then you download it. And right, the document's copyrighted by the SVA, but of course, you can go out and read it and use it and stuff like that. The copyright is to prevent you from republishing it yourself as your own work, but not to consume it. So that's, and we've tried to make it as open as possible, because the goal here is to really help bridge the world between the delivery operations environment that is sort of the SVA and then the development architecture environment like the IETF. I kind of liken it sometimes unto like what Nanog does, right? Nanog is full of people who actually take the technical specs for networks, deploy them and make them work, and the IETF writes those technical specs. And Nanog will feed back to the IETF where things work and where things don't work and ask for changes. And I think that's a very similar relationship between the SVA and the IETF for video. Does that sort of cover
it? That's helpful, thanks. I guess I'll have to check with the lawyers, but yeah, thank you.
Well, and the other thing I should add too is obviously we have, like, Sanjay and myself, we're very active in the IETF, and so part of our role here, I think, is to act as that that bridge where it's appropriate and to pull things out of one and bring them over into the other one. And there's other people at the IETF that's engage with the SVA on a regular basis in various working groups, and so I think there's an ongoing relationship of back and forth here.
Yeah, I want to.
Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, I want to say that there's a sort of a meta purpose of sharing that this work is going on because it's related to IETF work. The ins and outs of how people here actually engage in work there and vice versa are a little trickier perhaps.
And I'll point out that we do the opposite to groups like the SVA. We take the updates that happen at the IETF and places like MOPS, and a bunch of us go back to the SVA in their working groups, and we talk there about what's going on in the IETF to make sure that we've got cross-pollination going on actively and ongoing between the two organizations. Anyways, that's my presentation. Did Sanjay have anything you wanted to add in? My co-author?
I think you've covered it pretty well, so I don't really have anything more to add unless there are any questions.
And you can follow up with either one of us or both of us afterwards. We're obviously here on the IETF, and we're around other places, so don't be shy. All right, thank you.
Great.
Great.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
All right. So I think, Jake, you are up next with the follow-up from working group last call on the OpsCons doc.
Yeah. All right. I think I can't click on the video while it's trying to wait. Oh, what happened? There's a modal that pops up. Okay, I guess I have to leave that up. That makes sense. Sorry, I think it's my first time trying to use this particular tool. Usually I've shared my screen. All right. It's kind of neat though.
Nice, but you lose the opportunity to have embarrassing notifications show up to everyone in the working group.
Well, I can still do that like on my screen. You can see my reflection off the car out the window there. It's that time in the morning for me here on the West Coast. All right. So I was just going to give an update on our adopted draft that tell everybody where we are. So our last call, quote, passed without objections. There was one comment in support of advancing it, but this is not sort of the overwhelming support that we've seen in the room for some of the questions we've asked from time to time. So we wanted to just kind of confirm it and make sure that there really is working group consensus to move this forward. And I was going to go over kind of the status on our last few, gasps of working on this. We raised and closed over 40 issues. You can see them in the GitHub link. There's a bunch of good stuff there. We had 2 open issues remaining when we finished, and I guess I'd characterize these as like more running out of steam and having conflicts than necessarily we decided not to. Like we had a couple of leanings on this in different directions and some questions as to like really should we put this in, but so there was a little comment on it that like maybe if there's something that the operators can do about it, then we should include it, but maybe not otherwise. And so this was the last thing where I think we just dropped the ball on kind of getting it in. Its final state was assigned to me, so this one's my fault. There's some reasonable things that an operator can do if DNS is coming into play as a potential performance problem, and so it's not an unreasonable thing to include. We do not have this listed as one of our blockers for going ahead with last call. I expect there are other things that can affect performance that we did not really cover in the doc in the end. So this is perhaps a gap, but I'm not sure it's such an important gap that we should update it and do another last call. And the other one was kind of there was an interesting talk last time about the comparative latency under load from Comcast. And we had a little bit of discussion. I think Spencer had the idea that that there were a few worthwhile sentences to suggest on this topic, and you know, I was a little bit, I'm not sure it really fits, but you know, waffly, and regardless, the sentences never quite got submitted. I guess I'd put this as another one that's maybe nice to have, but not necessary. But that's really all we had. And I guess my big question is, like, are we really ready to move forward? Can we, I don't know, run a poll? Does anybody have concerns about this that didn't make it to the list, etc.? So that is all I have. I guess really what I wanted is a discussion, maybe a confirmation, something like this. Section on mock. Yes, thanks, Ali. That'll have to be its own working group, I'm afraid, in my opinion. But please feel free to disagree. Floor's open. I'm inviting cues.
Eric?
Yeah, no specific comment on the draft per se, but more on the working group last call. There was only one review by Glenn on the mailing list. That's a little bit short, right? So I don't want to be the document shepherd to say and declare working group consensus when there was only one review. So I really urge other participants in this working group that are here or not listening, basically to review the document and saying like Glenn, it's okay, I support like it is, that's enough, right? So you don't need to put 10,000 issue. The shorter the better somehow, specifically for you, Jake, right? Yeah. So I'm slightly concerned if only one review done by Glenn, it may cause problem when we go later in the process, right? I've seen this happening. So we urge people to review it.
So part of the purpose, part of the reasoning of putting this on the agenda for today was to flesh out if there were issues that were going to come up in IETF wide last call. Let's hear where they are now, rather than being surprised. But I certainly take the point that a document shepherd's going to be unimpressed by a single. So I see two people in the queue. I think that probably where we want to close out today's activity is to take names. Who's willing to review or just send a note to the list saying that you read it and support it going forward. But I guess Sanjay is next.
Yes, I'm next, and I just wanted to I take Eric's point well, and I definitely owe a review, and I will be reviewing the document. So I'm on the record.
Great, thank you, Sanjay.
Len?
So I can't volunteer to review since apparently I already did a review. But I will take this over to the working groups over the SBA and make them aware of the document as well, so they can get some eyeballs from that organization on it, and I'll spread it around some social contacts I have in the industry, because I think this is some important stuff. To Eric, I wanted to point out that, because we're now using GitHub for the editor process for this, I will point out that a tremendous amount of conversation actually took place on the GitHub. And I'm wondering if somehow it would be appropriate to make a shepherd aware of the GitHub conversations that went into the process, because historically that would have been on the list, but now it's sort of on this other place. So I don't know how to solve that, but suggestions would be welcome.
There is indeed a dichotomy somehow between the GitHub and the mailing list, but until now it's still the mailing list that counts. And if you open, for instance, a couple of issues in the GitHub, nothing's block you to send in the working group last call. Nothing prevents you to say, on the mailing list, I have opened 3, 4, 5 GitHub issue, and that counts, right? Basically.
Yeah, thanks, Eric.
Yeah, I guess as an author, I'd also like to point out that contributing to the document by commenting and opening issues does not imply support for getting the document to the, for advancing the document to, through last call. These are two separate things, and while we are very grateful, we need I would say we need a separate confirmation of that, regardless of the venue. But yeah, the mailing list, as Eric said, is the normative one there.
Okay, Renan?
I would be happy to review the document as well. I just want to say the document looks really good. There are good comparing and contrasting of various options, and section 7 is comprehensive, but I'll definitely review it over the mailing list as well. And thanks to the authors for putting together this document.
Great, thanks.
Well, I guess I have one question also that occurred to me. Like in some other working groups, I've seen like a request to send like, we're not aware of any IPR for all the authors, and maybe we support advancing this document also. I didn't do that. I kind of forgot, but should I? I guess. I don't know what our process is here exactly.
Yeah, well, I mean, welcome. You're our first document for this working group, so I think we're kind of figuring out what our process is, as well as, as we'll get into a little later, dealing with the fact that we're not actually meeting in person, and kind of struggling to the dichotomy is not. I don't think the dichotomy is between GitHub and the mailing list. I think the dichotomy is between people who come to meetings and the people who participate on the mailing list. So I think it would be fine and helpful for the authors to do that. I think that, as I said, I think we need to take some names, and already got one. I'm appreciative of Glenn's offer to take this to a wider audience at the same time as, we are in last call, right? This is not a, what document would you write if you were writing a document request. This is is this document in reasonable shape to meet its objectives? Yes, no, what can we do to fix it? Kind of call. Ali.
So to Jake's question, at least when I was working group chair, as the chair, I asked the group whether there was any IPR considerations from anybody, not just the authors, obviously, anybody from the working group. And but beyond that, since this is an informational document, I'm not sure whether the IPR declarations do apply to this one. Maybe they still do. I don't know. But since it's an informational,
I think the IPR, as in the note, well, IPR always applies. But what I got out of Jake's comment was and I support the document. Explicitly sending the note to the mailing list to say that the support for it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we will have any concerns, Jake. Anyway, I just wanted to point to that. Anyway, Thank you.
All right, that is it then. I guess if nobody else has comments, I don't know if you guys want to run a poll in the room, or we'll just do the list. But I will leave that to you. Thanks.
Yeah, and I guess, Kyle, what do you think? I would be happy to get more names from people here who are willing to go through the document and, send a thumbs up or questions to the mailing list. I don't know if we want to do that as a poll, if we want to ask people to volunteer in the chat, or if we just want to take the attendance list and send mail to everybody. I'm not above mail spam.
Yeah, I think volunteering in the chat seems fine. I'm not sure if the polls are anonymous or not, and if they're anonymous, that isn't going to help too much. I don't think I've run a poll through MeetEcho. So
okay, I think we did last time, but I could be wrong about that. All right.
I don't remember what I ate for breakfast this morning. So
I just remember that I had a very clicky keyboard in the last meeting. Okay, so how about this? Let's see if we can find. All right, you've got one. I was aiming for 3. Let's go for 5 people in the chat who are willing to review the document and send a thumbs up or a question to the mailing list for last working group last call within the next 2 weeks. Go. Okay, great. We've got two. Come on, we can get somebody else here. Dum, 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 dum. Everyone else has wandered away from the keyboard and is consuming suitable beverages for whatever time zone they're in. All right.
Did you mean 5 in addition, or because we got 5? It looks like.
Yeah, I think we are good to go. Thanks, and I appreciate
Awesome.
everyone's volunteering. Great. Thank you, Jake and co-authors, and thank you everyone who has volunteered. All right. So now on to the media operations use case for an augmented reality application on edge computing infrastructure.
Well, Leslie, I have a question before we move on.
Mm-hmm.
As you will remember, we decided to have a live document at the end of the RFC eventually, and we haven't really received anything from the RFC editor at this point. But if maybe it needs to be taken care of during the last call as well. Maybe AD or someone else needs to make that clear. At this point, we have a tiny URL link that links to the Google document, but eventually we want to have a base in the somewhere in the IETF domain. So if anybody has any idea how to do it, or maybe whether we should take an action at this point to do that, it might be good to check as well. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for bringing that back up. I suspect it's something that we'll have to deal with either in working group last call or IETF-wide last call, and see if get us to a point where everyone is comfortable that we have a usable answer. But I don't think we're quite there today. Cool. All right, over to you, Raynon.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Rinan Krishna, and I will be presenting an update to our draft. This is a joint work with Akbar Rahman. So updates to the draft are in section 3.1. We have also added a new section 5 to the draft. We will talk about these changes in the next few slides. The updates are in the form of reorganizing section 3.1 around the notion of AR data processing pipeline. We have also added section 5, where we summarize the network characteristics of AR application traffic, as well as TCP's interaction with 4G LTE network carrying AR traffic. So let us look at those updates. In section 3.1, we give a brief sketch of an AR data processing pipeline that consists of 3 consecutive subtasks, namely tracking, followed by an acquisition of a model of the real world, and finally registration. Firstly, we need to track the 3-dimensional coordinates and 6-dimensional pose that includes coordinates and orientation of objects in the real world. These track natural features are then used to develop an annotated point cloud-based model. Finally, the coordinate systems, brightness, and color of virtual and real objects need to be aligned in a process called registration. In addition to the requirements for ABR algorithms, there are other operational issues that need to be considered for AR use cases, such as the one described in this draft. In a study conducted to characterize multi-user AR over cellular networks, the following issues were identified and have been added in section 5. Firstly, the uploading of data from an AR device to a remote server for processing dominates the end-to-end latency. Secondly, a lack of visual features in the grid environment can cause increased latencies as the AR device uploads additional visual data for processing to the remote server. Finally, AR applications tend to have large bursts that are separated by significant time gaps. As a result, the TCP congestion window enters slow start before the large bursts of data arrive, increasing the perceived user latency. The study quoted in the draft shows that segmentation latency at the RLC layer impacts TCP's performance during slow start. We would like to thank Spencer Dawkins, Rohit Abhishek, and Jake Holland for providing very helpful feedback on the mailing list. We would give our detailed response to the feedback on the mailing list. We would like to take this opportunity to invite reviewers and contributors to improve the draft. The draft is now on GitHub. Many thanks to Kyle Rose for helping out. As a starting point for a discussion, as Spencer has suggested in the mailing list, for future versions of the draft, we could abstract out from just discussing the particulars of AR applications using resources on the edge to the general idea of deploying edge resources for AR, VR, and 360-degree streaming type applications. So this is essentially up to the working group to agree whether that is the correct scope of the draft. Additionally, from our perspective, the intended audience for this draft is network operators. So with the chair's permission, we would like to open the floor for a discussion.
Chris?
Yeah, so I read the draft. It's an excellent start. I think I agree with a lot of the feedback that's already been given on the list, and I apologize for not getting my feedback on the list for the meeting. I said that I would, and I didn't. But I will get you some feedback. One of the things I did observe is that there's a lot of discussion about generation and processing on the device itself. And with the intended audience is, network operators. To me, it was not concretely tied enough to what's happening on the network and where those latencies are coming from and time budget being spent in one place versus another. It wasn't clear to me how those things were related. And as a network person trying to read this, that was confusing to me.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for the comments. Definitely, we can add more text to the draft, clarifying in more precise terms what are the various steps which which make up the whole time budget. I'd also like to add here that the description of the various AR processes are just a brief sketch. They are not meant to be comprehensive. If someone is interested in a comprehensive discussion, they can look at the references. So the discussion of AR is deliberately kept very brief. But yeah, we are open to more suggestions.
Are there any other immediate questions for Renan? So I appreciate that you will go through the detailed responses on the mailing list, which is absolutely appropriate because there were some good in-depth reviews. But I did think it would be worth it if the working group would actually, if the working group would discuss a little bit more about one of the points that Jake raised, which is, whether this document as it stands is straddling at least two worlds and best to pick which one. I don't know, Rena, if you want to address that at all now, or if we should open the floor to other comments and ask Jake to reiterate that point.
No, absolutely. I think I'll give my comments on that, and I'll definitely want to hear what the working group wants to say. So I think both Spencer and Jake have raised this issue of the scope and the intended audience of the document. So what we want to do with the document is to make it sort of, as I said, abstract out of the particulars of AR applications and discuss what are the implications of not only AR but VR and 360-degree streaming applications on the utility of edge computing resources. So as Spencer put it, I think he said that reasons to deploy edge computing with the reasons not being about specific applications. So I think that would be from my perspective, that would be a really nice direction to go to. But I want to hear what the working group thinks.
As would we? Does anybody want to wade in? I think, yeah, go ahead, Kyle. Share your thoughts.
Well, yeah. So speaking as a participant rather than as a chair, I just say that it feels like the problems that the AR draft is trying to address are not specific to augmented reality. They're much more general, and it seems to be that it seems to me that there's a large class of interactive applications that need really low latency, which implies things about where compute is located, how quickly objects can be fetched, how, and what constraints like physics has on how close those things need to be to you in order to achieve a desired level of latency. That I sort of, I guess one of my fears is that by having the term AR in the title and having it be focused directly on that use case, that a lot of people would be like, augmented reality, I'm not doing that, even though the concerns would be shared by a much larger group of people. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. That's something that I've been sitting on for a while.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that. As the draft progressed, we have realized that its scope should broaden, or more precisely, we should abstract out of particular AR applications into more general issues, which resources on the edge can help mitigate.
Jake?
Right. So that was one of the options. So that's good that we're hearing plus ones to that side of it. I guess I would say that there are some. So like Renan was saying, I think there are some tighter constraints for that come from the head motion kind of constraints than basically anything I've heard of yet, including gaming. Like for that one, you're looking at maybe, I think last I saw, a 45 millisecond total budget, but this one's more like 15 at the outside, if I remember right. So that's a significant difference. That's a scope constraint potentially. But I just, do you have, you said there are many applications that need it. Did you have others in mind here, Kyle?
So besides AR, VR, 360 degrees streaming, there is also certain vehicular use cases that would require edge computing resources, certain IoT use cases as well. And the one common thread across all of those applications is the requirement for low latency, and also the fact that the devices are typically battery driven, and so that limits the amount of resources that is available, and that also causes this heat problem, that also causes the battery drainage problem. So across all of those kinds of use cases, you have these similar requirements, and they can be mitigated by various engineering solutions involving the edge resources.
So that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess it almost seems like there are two levels of docs that are wanted here, because there's a unique combination of problems that augmented reality and virtual reality share. But the individual problems are then overlap with other areas. So it's almost like you want the augmented reality problem statement, and then have that refer to, to documents in other areas that are addressing subsets of that problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what I would say is that at the operational level, as Spencer says in his mail, there are a lot of things like the choice of the transport protocol that are not necessarily decided by the network operators, but by the application developers, and that then means that at the network operator level, there are these weird sort of traffic patterns that they need to deal with to provide certain, say, QoE. So QCI comes to mind, which are provided by 4G and 5G vendors. So yes, there is a set of let's say requirements posed by the AR application, which are also then the requirements for other kinds of applications like certain IoT applications or autonomous vehicles, etc., etc. So I think the fact that that you can use engineering solutions, load balancing, deciding where to offload, when to offload, those sorts of things, in combination with the edge devices, is sort of a common thread across all these applications, I think.
Thank you. Karen?
Rilan, my apologies, I haven't fully read the document, but I had a curiosity question. You talked about dynamically changing QoE. Is there any quantitative way to decide what is quality of experience? Are there any metrics you have in mind for those?
So I have given a reference to that, and typically the QoE metrics that the application designers come up with have to be tied to actual network things like latency and bandwidth. So yes, there are certain metrics that you can use, but they need to be translated into the standard network performance metrics like latency and bandwidth.
Okay, yeah, I'll review the document and provide you more comments on it.
Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you. I've been putting myself in queue and coming out of queue and in queue and out of queue, because the around the question of do we need to capture sort of the use case of AR and tape it up as the target? It strikes me that we might want to articulate that in terms that are around what is special about it that requires edge computing. You've listed a lot of the video related ones, and which is appropriate for MOPS document. But it strikes me too that it might be worth capturing some of the other compute challenges that make it not possible to address these issues by traditional, video challenge technologies such as CDNs. And in particular, I'm thinking about whether it's AR or VR or the metaverse, the whole notion of synchronization of objects, or shared reality, if you will, and how that impacts, the fact that you really do need to do local, you need to break the problem down based on what you're computing locally versus what you are achieving through communication. So I don't know if that's useful as a means of sort of saying, of describing what are the kinds of problems we think we're talking about here and why is edge computing important, or if it's a complete red herring. But that's where my thinking was running to.
Well, definitely for AR and VR applications, the latency is important, and one of the reasons why that's important is because of synchronization issues that we have discussed in the draft also. So definitely, whether you talk of AR, VR, or multiverse, you would need to think about synchronization and a way to deal with the latency issues. Also, because most of these devices are on wireless networks that are very variable in their quality. So yeah, definitely synchronization is.
Yeah, and I think part of my point was, it is the nature of the problem space that there are certain things that you can split across nodes, and there are certain things you cannot. Right. So, I mean, it's the age-old problem of multi-parallel processor computing and shared memory and/or messaging, right? When you're solving a problem, what are the things that actually need to happen locally, and what are the things that can be solved by synchronized communication elsewhere? And there are some things that just cannot be pushed off. Again, I didn't want to rat hole there, but just in terms of if we want to talk about the problem space in a means that is somewhat agnostic of the particular application, focusing it on, the level of breaking the compute problem apart, and what needs to be done locally versus not locally, and therefore what video processing has to happen locally versus not locally, and what are the implications, might be helpful. Or, as I said, it might be a complete red herring.
No, I think it's a very valid point. And if I just, off the top of my head, if I recall the Satyanarayanan paper that we have referenced in the draft, they talk about 3 tiers. So you have the actual device, you have the edge, and you have the cloud. And the device actually represents the design considerations of mobility and sensing, whereas the edge deals with the design consideration of network proximity, and the cloud deals with the design consideration of, I think, compute elasticity, storage permanence, and hardware consolidation. And within these design constraints, I guess you need to consider synchronization and how it is affected by the special nature of AR/VR applications.
Okay. So I think I don't see anyone else in queue. So I think that the next steps are, Renan, you're planning a more detailed response to the comments received on the mailing list. I will take this opportunity to observe that the document is now in GitHub, and thanks to you and Kyle for getting that sorted. So people who prefer to do GitHub-based engagement can now do so. And we've picked up at least one more person offering to do a review. That was Karen, who had offered to do a review of the document. And please share comments with the mailing list. Is there anything else that we should cover here today on this topic? Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Renan. And we'll head to the mailing list. Kyle, you were going to say something?
No. I was just gonna say our next speaker is Spencer, who may need to extricate himself from his other meeting.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Renan. Spencer. Sorry for the delay. We'll be with everyone in a moment. We're just trying to get Spencer's attention. If not, we can move on to the next item.
Okay, so I think that we probably should do that. We'll tell in the chat, we will tell Spencer that we've reordered the agenda. And if he can't join us then, I think we can probably speak from his notes to the mailing list. I think there were some good discussion points there. Yeah. Okay. All right. Li Jun, if you could give us your update on the packet differences. Yes, thank you.
Should I?
And if you want to share slides, you can click on the Share Preloaded Slides button at the top left, and then select your deck.
Presentation review, the very left. Which one?
It's in the upper left.
Share screen. Is that
one? Yeah, Share Preloaded Slides.
Okay, got it. Yes. So can you see my screen?
Yeah, we're looking at your screen as opposed to the slides that were in the that we uploaded from the data tracker, but it's fine. You might want to put it into presentation mode though, so we don't see all of the.
Is that okay right now?
Yep, that looks good.
Okay. Yeah, great. So I want to have a summary of the feedback that I received from the last meeting. So the comments were, I think in summary, I think the comments are mainly related to how to review the characteristics of the microblocks contained in the packet to the network and implement the selective packet dropping at the packet level. So I want to emphasize on the packet level. So I'm very glad that the concept is very well received in my mind. And we think it is beneficial to improve the quality of experience of video streaming by reducing the packet dropping granularity from the current traffic class level to the individual packet level, which means inside a flow, each individual packet may have its own significance level, and the router could treat those individual packets differently, or even within the packet itself. Yes, and we need such information of whether this packet is significant or not to be reviewed to the network nodes. For example, API could be implemented to input such information or metadata from the application, which might be mapped to the IPv6 extension header or IPv4 options or a dedicated metadata field in the IP header. And I want to thank Drake about for the reply in the email list. We will take a closer look at your comments because we haven't got much time in the morning to read carefully about each sentence in the email. And we will reply you later offline. But for the diffserv, I want to say is the traffic management is at the class level, which means the edge router will look into some fields like source, destination addresses, and flow ID to map this packet to certain traffic class, which means that inside a flow, the packets would have the same significance if diff server is used. But yes, I will carry the discussion offline in an email list. Next, I want to talk a bit more on the major characteristics of video frames that could affect the significance of a single packet. The first one is the frame type. We all know MPEG-4 has, have 3 types of frames. iframe is self-contained, so which means it will have no references to other frames, and it is encoded by itself. And it is the keyframe that provides checkpoints for resynchronization or re-entry to support trick modes and error recovery. We can think this is the most important type of frames in a whole stream. And P-frame is the predictive frame, which means it can allow macro blocks to be compressed using temporal prediction in addition to spatial prediction. So for motion estimation, P-frames could use frames that have been previously encoded. It could be a P-frame, it could be iframe. So for a B-frame, it stands for bidirectional frames, which means you will refer to the frames that occur both before and after it. So each macro block of a B-frame can be predicted using backward prediction or using forward prediction. So accordingly, the next characteristic I want to point out is whether the packet contains frames that are referenced by other frames. So according to this prediction relationship among different frames, so each frame might be referenced by other frames. So for iframe, the iframe does not refer to any other frame, so is at least, but it is at least referenced by a P frame after it. So losing the first iframe in the group of pictures would cause video's picture even missing a few seconds. Because P and B frames referencing to iframe would not be decoded nor displayed either. For a P frame, because it refers to a picture in the past, however, it also might be referenced by a P frame after it or a B frame before or after it. And for a B frame, it can also act as a reference. In the rare case, it's not a common case. So if B frame is referenced by others, it is termed as a reference B frame. But in the normal case or common case, the B frame is not used as a reference, so it is usually called as a non-reference B frame. Another important characteristic of MPEG video packets is the movement level of the video sample contained in the packet. The video things with a low level of movement are less sensitive to both B frame and P frame packet loss. For example, if right now we are having a conference call, my background or my body, if I did not move much, it has very low level of movement contained in the video. So the video things with were not very sensitive to the B frame or P frame packet loss. But on the other hand, if you're watching football video on live video, it is the movement level is very high, and it will be very sensitive or more sensitive to both B frame and P frame packet loss. So for lost P frame can impact the remaining part of the GOP. While lost B frame has only local effects, slowly moving content or very large static background, like my video right now if I'm sharing. So in a scene of dynamically moving content, loose B frame has more dramatic impact, and scale can be as far-reaching as a P frame loss. So if we can have some level of estimation or indication of the movement level of the video sample containing packet, we can combine with other knowledge of the packet, we can have more information regarding the significance of the packet. The last one I want to point out is whether the video sample contained in the packet belongs to a region of interest or not. So microblocks that are identified to represent objects in ROI are more important than other microblocks of non-ROI regions. For example, you are watching a video, you're paying more attention to certain object or certain person in the video than the other microblocks that are representing other objects or background are not so important compared to the microblocks of the ROI. So based on those characteristics of the MPAC video packets, we probably could use some way of calculating the importance of the individual packet. I did not show here in the slides, but what I can think of is, based on the frame type, we think the iframe is the most important, so we probably give more weight to the iframe. And for those frames that are referenced by the others, would be given more weight. And for the movement, based on the movement level, if the movement level is high, then the B frame and P frame would have more importance or more weight than B frame and P frame with less movement. And then, if we think the packet has ROI object, then maybe we have higher weight. So we can combine all those factors into a certain calculation method. I personally, I don't have a good answer, but we can think of one, like by putting different weights on those important things, then maybe we can come up with a significance level for our individual packet. So here is a summary of the requirements of network and applications. So we think the application needs to, in order to make this work, it needs to reveal some information to the network to enable this selective packet dropping. Examples could be, receiving end user's preference on the media quality. So what is your tolerance quality degradation regarding to the example resolution? So if you are watching a 4K video, is it okay for you to watch 480 P video or not? If it is okay, maybe some of the packets do not need to be dropped, but those like the iframes should be maintained. Other frames could be dropped, and other things like the characteristic of the media content I presented earlier. And also, for example, the IOR, the frame type, whether the pack contains frames that are referenced by others. And correspondingly, the network should be able to leverage the above information reviewed by the application, and then selectively drop packets or potentially parts of the packets from competing media stream flows. And retransmission, we can think in that way, retransmission could be maximally limited because some of the packets that are important have already received by the receiver, and the receiver can accept this quality degradation, then the other parts of the packets do not to be retransmitted again. So the receiving end user is able to consume in the deliver packets as many as possible in time with acceptable quality. And this is the slide I added just now. Those are the references to papers we have published. And the very first one we were published in 2018, and the recent one that were very relevant to this paper, to this contribution is this one, the coded communication for emergent network applications with new IP, which is to be appeared as an invited paper in proceedings of the 17th International Conference on Mobility Sensing and Networking. Okay, that's all for my presentation. I would like to see any comments.
Jake.
Hi, June, if I
Mhm.
got your name. Sorry. I guess I'd like to clarify. I think you characterized the responses as positive so far. I'm not sure I would call my view on this positive at this stage. I think there might be potential here, but what I'd be interested to see is so first off, I think the problem of differential dropping that you communicate to the network is exactly what diffserv can do, and that's a good approach. That's a much better approach, in my opinion, than option header ideas that you mentioned. But I think there are challenges, and that you'd have to be looking at a controlled network either way. So I guess what I'm interested in is basically really what do you gain out of this? I think this is a thing that you can do in experiment already. And I'd like to see quantitative results discussing it in terms of user QoE before I'd like to see this really given a lot more time. But that's just kind of my view on it. I think it's a potentially interesting thing, but like the fact that iframes are different does not necessarily imply that dropping them less often gives you a better QoE without the sort of measurement to that effect. And I guess I'd like to, there's probably constraints on that. I guess I'd like to see an exploration of what do you actually get. That's my main feedback here. But thank you.
Yeah, no, I did not regard your email as a very positive feedback, but I do thank you for replying me through the email list, giving me comments. For diffserv, I want to point out it is a coarse-grained class-based mechanism for traffic management, which means at the edge of diffserv domain, the edge router would look into the source destination addresses and the flow ID to determine the DSCP value for that packet. So it does not mean the packet within the flow would have different significance levels or DSCP assignment, because the router would only look at the source and destination and flow ID. We will not look at anything else to determine the DSCP value. So within...
I agree if you use the router to set the value. However, I think you can set the value at the host and have it come in with a diffserv ID, which then would be treated differently by the router. So I guess I'd encourage you to look at that instead, where the sender sets it according to the sock-op. There's the IPTOS API in Linux, for example. And if you can set that at the host, then I think you'll be able to perform experiments that do not depend on router understanding the class and just use the class just based on the incoming diffserv at the router layer when you try to go between different diffserv domains. But just to clarify that point. But good luck. That it sounds interesting if it really pans out. So
yeah, I will take a look at what you mentioned. Yes. Okay.
Thanks, Jake. Magnus?
Yes. So I definitely have to support one of Jake's comments here, really, about do you have any video qualitative experience results for this type of work? Because I mean, I think you presented a very simplified view of how the latest video codecs achieve their high performance, and you're down to IP and reference structures, etc., on macro level, and that's, I mean, that's all mixed up. So for getting this to work properly, to my understanding, you need to ensure that you can actually separate out the data you want to drop, from both that it works through both your security solutions and your framing solutions, and format and still get a readable byte stream. So I mean, I hope you have some QoE results that you really can show that, because before you can show it that even get that with the framing in place for those applications, I don't see a point of doing this, because I think that's usually being when looking at this kind of barrier, so it's not worth it. So
Yeah. Thank you for your comment. Yes. Be honest, my background is not video coding side. I'm more, networking side, or mostly networking side. So for here, we want to point out there is could be significant differences among packets by using this use case. We did some research on what are the characteristics could be leveraged, but I think those characteristics could be do not need to be revealed to the network on one hand, because if we could have the help from the codecs or application by saying, okay, this packet, because it has those kinds of characteristics, so I would indicate it is more important than the other packets in the stream. So we will have the application or codecs to do that instead of network tries to understand those characteristics.
Yeah. Sure, but I mean the issue here is that you have a very interactive system. Is that if you drop a certain amount of packets, your video quality will be subjected to get different results, and that depends on how your system. So you actually need to have to do both parts here to figure out and see what results you actually can get, and that I think is the kind of homework you need to go do here. And you also say, no, there's some properties here. Yes, you can code those properties. You can determine which packets, etc., and you can actually cut out the data. But I think you need to start from the application and then come to what you need from the network. I think you're kind of starting from the network here and going backwards. So
I understand. Yes, I think your comments are very legitimate. The application, we definitely need the support from the application side, because in order to have this information or the significance of the packet known to the network, this information needs to be calculated, or some kind of a revealing from the application to the network. And as you said, dropping some packets may result in the quality degradation. But if the end user is able to tolerate that, then maybe it is okay, right? So as I said, if I'm watching a 4K, at a certain point I'm only watching 480p, I'm okay with that. Then the retransmission of those other frames may not need it. But I think what you commented earlier are very legitimate, that the application does needs to support this kind of operation in the network. Okay. All right.
All right. Yeah, I closed the queue because we're pretty much out of time. Right. But I want to thank you for doing your presentation.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much, Jake, and others for comments.
The follow-up from the specific discussion points as outlined, I think a thought people probably want to be putting on the table is if this is going to go forward at the IETF, what is the appropriate place for it to go? I don't think the MOPS working group would be the right place, but perhaps we can help shape it up to the point where it is something that can go to another working group.
That would be helpful, definitely.
Great. All right, thank you. All right, so Spencer is still busy elsewhere. I don't think we are going to skip right over the mock item. I think that we need to at least speak a little bit about the notes that Spencer sent to the mailing list. So the Media Over Quick side meeting occurred earlier this week. I was not there. I'm probably not the best person to present the report out from it. I don't know if you want to give it a go, Kyle, or if we want to see how much I can make up on the fly.
Probably not I'm probably not the right person to do that. Was anyone else there who has who feels confident enough about the about their understanding of the outcome could give a brief summary? I guess not.
All right. So Spencer, as I said, forwarded to the mailing list a pointer to his notes from the meeting on November.
So, Luke is in the queue now.
Okay. Luke, would you like to take the baton?
Unfortunately. So yeah, I joined like 15 minutes late to the Media Over Quick mailing list, but I've also been kind of responding to it a bit, and even try to get it formed. Really, it comes down to there's a lot of different media use cases, right? There's a lot of different protocols out there. You guys know that there's this whole swath, and there's this new transport layer, Quick, and really this is just an exploration of what we could use Quick for. There are some companies and some individuals that are using it already to deliver media, but most of the meeting was about what use cases exist. People speaking up saying like, oh, we need seeking support, or oh, we need, I want peer-to-peer, or oh, this is for real time, this is for gaming, and trying to explore what existing standards exist at IETF and whatnot, and also what would be a good use case for Quick, and what changes would be required for Quick. But the meeting didn't really cover that too much. So right now it's still in an exploratory phase. It's still trying to figure out what working group or groups could be created to deal with this, if they're even necessary. But yeah, it's a really rough state right now. Just trying to come up with requirements and trying to come up with what desired target use cases there are.
Great. Thank you for that, and thank you for leaping in the last moment. My understanding from Spencer's notes is that a large part of the conclusion is that it's important to sort of stake out, what use cases people want to pursue, or at least be clear about what use cases are in play. I don't know if, Glenn, you want to speak to your follow-up on that point? Assuming Glenn is still here. Glenn is still here.
Yeah, hi there. Yeah, so, and I can't remember which lists my comments ended up onto last night, but I made the observation that, this is a pretty big ocean, and there's lots of different applications. And it's something we chewed through when we created MOPS in the first place, right? Just because there's so much, there's some stuff that's really well developed, there's some stuff that's sort of in the midpoint development use case wise, and there's some stuff that's sort of like, well, hey, this is really cool. Now that we have this, we can do these new things. Let's explore. And it seemed like, and by the way, I should say I'm very supportive of the mock stuff. So I'm coming from a friendly voice here. I think there's some cases, in particular, I suggested things like ingest, media ingest, because we already have existing reliable protocols like SRT that have said that they're playing with, going over Quick. And there's other, applications, and we've seen postings from parties that are using Quick experimentally for ingest. But the use cases for ingest are fairly well developed. So I suggested, hey, for the very well developed stuff, maybe that's what Mock could build a charter around and expand upon and focus on. And then for other things, maybe it's time to come back into other groups like MOPS. Gosh, we named these things badly. But come back into MOPS for discussion, because I think what MOPS is very good at is allowing things to sort of evolve to a more mature state, and then find the appropriate home to go to. And that was sort of my take on the two things. And again, very supportive of the mock stuff. So,
what exists today, I can help illuminate. So first off, my cat's on the mouse. Hopefully it doesn't mute me. I work at Twitch, and we're pushing, we're releasing a quick-based video delivery protocol using web transport. I know Facebook is using Quick for ingest already with their player. And in this case, we've got two kind of production-ready implementations. And then people have been experimenting with RTP over Quick, and also SRT, as you mentioned. SRT is trying to proxy over Quick as well. So there's a few different areas. There's a few different implementations out there. It's really too early to tell what works well and what maps well as well to Quick. Because sometimes it's like you mentioned, the space is pretty well developed, and you need to have a compelling reason to use it, like not just using the technology because it exists.
I see Jonathan's entered the queue. Jonathan?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask to Luke, because he's mentioned his implementations, what he's found, what he's found so far. Like, what is Quick giving him that, existing like say TCP or UDP based things wouldn't do for him. In particular, is he taking advantage of some of the more complicated reliability and ordering? Because I think that's sort of where the interesting things happen for media.
Reading more and more over time on the mock mailing list. I did post one thread about the problems that we've seen. We're an HLS based stack, and with some modifications. But it really comes down to header-line blocking. Like, you're forced to download a single segment. You're downloading it sequentially, and when there's congestion, what do you do? Quick gives you the option to have things in parallel, so kind of coordinate them together, to cancel them better, and stuff like that. And that's really what we're utilizing. We're also in a position that we have our own CDN, so it's very easy to just push data over web transport. But you could totally do this with HTTP3 as well. It's just harder.
So I think that we have achieved the ambition of raising awareness and doing some cross-pollination between the mock effort and MOPS. I think there are some suggestions on the table that MOPS might be able to help base some of the discussions going forward in terms of taking out some of the use cases, but I think that we'll have to see if that transpires on the mailing list. And apart from that, I guess we would like to see how the mock work continues going forward. I think that's about as much as we can draw from this, absent a strong proponent in the room. Okay. All right. So also keep your eyes peeled for mock. Yeah, keep your eyes peeled for mock meetings at upcoming IETF meetings. Join the mailing list. Get engaged. Rah rah. All right, Kyle, go for it.
All right. So can everybody see the slides? I'll assume that's yes. So this is the MOPS 2-year retrospective. Can you believe it's been slightly over 2 years since the working group was formed? You can almost smell the benzene of the retrospecticus. No, that's a Simpsons reference if nobody gets it. Anyway, so I'm afraid that the first part of this deck is going to be a bit of a downer, but it gets better, I promise. So here's how it started. Basically 2 years ago, well, up until 2 years ago, there were some side meetings, the GGIE meetings, and then the video interest group side meetings that went on for several years. In Montreal in 2019 is when we had the MOPS BOF, where we got, essentially had a discussion about whether it was reasonable to make a working group and what the scope of the charter would be and whatnot. And so finally in November, it was formed just before the Singapore IETF. And so we had our first in-person session in Singapore. And then in March, the Vancouver meeting was canceled. And so here's how it's going now. Note the highlighted virtuals there, which is kind of so I think it's been kind of a downer for a lot of working groups, but I think it's especially been it's been an special challenge for MOPS because of the nature of a lot of the work that we do, right? So I just took a screenshot of the milestones quickly. There's a, like this was a snapshot that I took earlier this week, and I know that we've bumped some of these dates up or back, I guess, several times as we have kind of missed milestones. We have, obviously we have a few done, but we still have a lot of work that we intended to do at the beginning that is not done yet. These are the two documents we've adopted. It seems, it seems a little meager, but, on the other hand, that, publishing documents was not the main purpose of MOPS to begin with. It never was. What is our main purpose? Well, if you look at, this is in the wrong place in the slide. All right, anyway, there's some, I'll come back to this slide. So if you look at our charter, right, I've highlighted kind of the verbs, the actions that MOPS was chartered to take on. Solicit regular updates, solicit input, solicit discussion and documentation. There are a number of things here, and many of them are rendezvous functions, right? They are functions of getting people in the same room together to discuss common sets of problems and come up with either, classes of solutions or direct, figure out where there are gaps in existing standards and direct work to other working groups within the IETF and outside SDOs. And so without those hallway conversations, without the, having a bunch of people in the hackathon room, like working on the same thing or doing demos, without a lot of tourists coming to MOPS because they happen to have a free slot and they're like, all right, let me go, go into this room. It looks interesting. Without the, a lot of the cross-pollination of having everyone in the same physical space talking about problems and seeing where there's overlap and where there are, potential synergies between work and seeing the reduction in new work overall. I mean, that's been a real drag from virtual meetings. And I think it's impacted MOPS more than a lot of other working groups, which had explicit work items in progress and moving. But it probably has also impacted working groups that have been trying to find new work as well. I'm sure it differs from group to group, but has been my observation based on talking to other people. So that having been said, we've solicited a bunch of presentations. We've had a bunch of interesting talks. Will Law talked a few meetings ago. New participants have come to us. They've actually sought out MOPS, talked to us, and we've hooked them up with people in the working group and had them come in and give presentations. And moreover, there have been a lot of intangibles that MOPS has provided, right? We're responsible for a bunch of conversations happening. Even though they're not happening in a physical hallway, they're happening on the internet in virtual hallways. And so, I think that a lot of that, things like mock, things like the Renaissance of multicast, work on reducing latency, are all things that MOPS has assisted in helping get more attention paid to these things, and assisted in bootstrapping some of this work. And so I think that's a lot of what we've done. Now, going back to the earlier slide, some other things that we've done that MOPS has done in addition to kind of the work internal to the working group is providing external community engagement, right? So the SMPTE updates, SMPTE updates, Streaming Video Alliance updates. We have a paper that we submitted to SMPTE earlier this year that we're going to be presenting on in, I think it's in December, but don't quote me on that. So there's a bunch of stuff that we've done, and I'm pleased with how the working group has been going. But I mean, there are questions about how we can increase the efficacy of the working group. Like, what can we do to make ourselves more effective, right? I mean, meeting in person, yeah, that would be great. That would solve a lot of the problems that, or at least eliminate many of the challenges that we see today. But unfortunately, that's not actionable. We're either going to have an in-person meeting or we're not, and we don't have any control over that. That's going to be that's a kind of a shared decision among all the IETF participants. Do we just carry on as is? Are things going well enough that we think that we're on the right track? We should just make incremental changes from here on in. Do we broaden draft scope? Remember we talked before about looking at the augmented reality draft and saying, well, maybe the use case is much more specific than the problems described, so maybe we ought to broaden the scope there. It's another option. Some things that we probably should do is figure out how to unblock some of the unmet milestones, right? I mean, we have milestones that we added to the data tracker back at the very beginning, and they haven't, some of them haven't been finished yet, right? So what can we do to get those moving along? Should we solicit feedback from non-participants? Are there people who have, thought about participating in MOPS and decided not to? Or are there people who don't know about MOPS and maybe we ought to figure out maybe why they don't know about it? Should we coordinate with in-progress standards activity going on elsewhere in the IETF, right? So we could have we could do something experimental like designate point participants for interaction with other working groups, both within the IETF and in other standards organizations, and get either written reports or just presentations at meetings so that we can kind of spread information about these things in a more efficient manner. Having some forecasts about where we think the industry is going, so we can foresee what areas of work might need doing, and then kind of bring that information to relevant working groups. That's another option. Do we want to have some sort of vision or roadmap for IETF contributions to the media ecosystem, right? So the media ecosystem is vast and confusing. IETF participants may only see a small part of it and not understand how it fits into sort of the larger media ecosystem. And so maybe we could develop some problem statements for internet media operations to clarify some of the challenges that we're seeing. And maybe to use the challenges to then suggest directions for future work. And finally, should we solicit input from other working groups facing similar challenges, right? I think one of the things I don't have a good bead on is to what extent other working groups are seeing engagement challenges resulting from the lack of in-person meetings, and whether if some other working groups have seen similar challenges, what have they done over the past 20 months to help work on those. So now I'm going to throw it open to the floor for thoughts, suggestions. Looks like Glenn wants to make some comments.
Yeah,
probably to soft pedal some of the crap that I've just said.
Before we get there, I think we should ask Eric to give an update on the Iesg review of the working group, since that was one of our milestones.
To request speaking. So thank you for inviting me before I actually request. Indeed, so the MOPS is a kind of a time bomb attached to it, right? We need to kind of renew the working group. For me, it's okay. It's doing. I was really concerned at the beginning of this meeting, right? When I saw at the top of the hour only 11 people attending the meeting. It was kind of scary because MOPS is basically to attract people sharing the same common interest, right? So now we peak at 40, we are 33, so that's okay, I think. I've also heard a very interesting discussion in the last 2 hours or 1 hour and a half. So I'm pretty satisfied. I know that Warren, which is kind of the ops area director, right? So I'm in area director, but MOPS is in ops. is also happy with the functioning and how MOPS works. He's unable to join today because I guess it's a DNS up at the same time. It is of course more important for him than MOPS. The issue of other working group with these not in-person meetings is everywhere, right? It's more critical here, like you said, Kai, because it was really meant as a place to gather people with the shared interest, but the lack of work is hitting mostly everywhere, specifically the lack of new work. So we have a measure at the Iesg about the number of -00 draft, and this one is lower than 2 years ago for all the working groups. We don't do it per area, so maybe some areas are more impacted than others, but it's everywhere. Okay, and as Leslie, we talked also before when Kyle and myself and Leslie we were preparing this meeting, that you think, Leslie, I had no time to investigate further, but you think that the new -00 are only coming from very interested parties, right? So with a kind of a loss of smaller party trying to do new work. So for me, I'm pretty fine. We already discussed the MOPS at the previous IESG meeting, and it was continuing, right? So everyone says, okay, go on. And I remember what I said last time, IoT Ops is very similar to MOPS, right? And more when we do both for creating new working groups, sometimes say, oh, is it a la MOPS, right? Is it a MOPS-like? So MOPS now is an adjective somehow, right? In the ISG slang. So for me, yes, it's okay. So good job, and good job summary, Kai, by the way.
Great, thanks, Eric. And just to close the loop, my understanding is that we were reviewed after 2 years, and we are not dead yet. So, just to be clear.
Yeah, 2 years. It's basically, you know, right? There is a debrief of the ISG and the IAB next week. I will talk about MOPS there and say, yes, it's 2 years. It's extended 1 year.
Okay, thank you.
And then it will be 1 year, 1 year. But
Sword of Damocles is still there.
Glenn.
I was wrong in that I don't want to correct anything you said. I thought you did it really well. Thanks, Kyle, for running through that. I just want to add, you know, I've been a long-time proponent for MOPS, you know, going way back, and you know, I think we've done a lot of good stuff. You know, the core problem that was a lot of my motivation in the past is that we have the #1 use of the internet by, you know, data and scaling and driving to add those bigger pipes is video. And we've always had a sort of a historic slight disconnect with the representation of voices trying to do video stuff when we talked about things at the IETF. And being a video guy, that was always a thing, well, we need to fix this. And, you know, the reason why other groups of the IETF, you know, are very active, I think, and produce a lot of 00 drafts, as Eric points out, is that we have a real established community, especially if you look at transport. I mean, transport's been core at the IETF for how long? And things like DNS has been core at the IETF. And this is the home where those people come and they talk. They have a community they've established. You know, we have a number of parties from different organizations that all know each other, have known each other for decades, that come together and work on problems. And I think that we're sort of the early days of bridging that gap between the IETF and these video guys out there, which are producing all these documents. But I'm seeing a very positive, you know, developments. You know, I'm seeing that we have, you know, when places like CDNI needed working group chairs, you know, Sanjay was around to step up and become a co-chair of CDNI. Which connects to, like, you know, the real world and the real delivery folks versus just people developing technology. You know, and we have other things that are being discussed and thrown around that is creating a welcoming home for the people from that video world that are doing all those video things on the internet and driving all the traffic and all the scalability to come into the IETF and have conversations And I think that MOPS has shown through the parties that have come here, and I believe the parties that will still come, that, when people ask the question, I come from a video world, I need to engage with the IETF. I believe I want to engage with the IETF. How do I do that? That now that MOPS exists, it's a place to say, well, you go talk to the MOPS guys first. They may not be the right final destination, but they're the right first destination. And they can, help you bring in, they can be a friendly voice, a friendly face, and help things mature to the point where they're ready to then connect with other IETF working groups and build that bigger community. So it's early days, but I see that community developing nicely. And I'm very hopeful that we're going to see, this continue on and the relationships grow. And so that, 10 years from now, we're going to have this whole room full of, IETF video people that have known each other for 10 years. And when there's a new problem, a new thing to work on, this is where they come to do it. So that's just my 2 cents I want to throw in.
All right, thanks, Glenn. Sanjay.
Sanjay, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah. I just wanted to echo what Glenn just said so well. I think there's a lot of issues that are not necessarily well defined in terms of that, I know I need some work on protocols, so IETF working groups are the right place. There are many cases operationally where MOPS seems like a good, first place to start and bring the question that may not be, wanting to change the protocol, but maybe, the making sure that you understand it and you implement it right. So some of those types of areas really fit well within, what this working group can offer. So I think there's a great deal of value, and obviously as Kyle was saying that, we don't have the luxury right now of meeting in person. So a lot of those hallway conversations that may happen and that may lead to people that are attending a specific, working group, but they may show up here because, oh yeah, that's really an operational issue that at least we should bring it back into the MOPS working group. So we kind of don't have that right now. But regardless of that, I think this is a good venue where I know SVA can benefit a lot, Streaming Video Alliance. There are a lot of different operational issues and best practices that they're dealing with, some of which might actually lead to some work in the within the different working groups within IETF. But at least MOPS is one place where we think we can bring some of the discussions.
Great. Thank you, Sanjay.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's clear that it's been useful to a lot of folks. So I'm optimistic, and definitely supportive of continuing the working group.
From the chair standpoint, I think the only thing that's really troubling me in all of this is how quiet the mailing list is, and as I alluded to earlier, the sort of bifurcation between the people who come to meetings and the discussion that doesn't happen on the mailing list. And I don't entirely know how to address that. I mean, I think the reality is a lot of mailing lists have gotten quiet, and just because mail is so last century. It isn't helped by the fact that we don't have that sort of vibrant, people know each other community thing going on. But I'm saying it here in my out loud voice just because I think it is an area that we're going to have to find answers to if we want to successfully progress through discussions of topics and documents and last calls and whatnot as we go along. Glenn, are you wanting to say more, or are you just lounging in queue? Scared him out of queue.
Nope.
I'm not the microphone.
Luke?
Say from my personal experience, I haven't known when to interact with this working group. Like, even just a little blurb about Media Over Quick earlier, I wasn't sure if it's appropriate to say what I've been working on in this working group, or if I should just go straight to like a more specific one, like media over quick. So it kind of means, at least in my mind, discussions are either scoped correctly already, or end up in like the catch-all in MOPS.
Right. Well, and I think it's a good question, and maybe partly because even if you review the history of discussions on the mailing list, you're not going to see a lot of exemplars. But I mean, I would say at this point, the mailing list is going to be what we make it. And speaking as one chair, I would rather see more discussion there, more ideas tossed out there than fewer. So certainly, please don't feel shy.
Yeah, if something's off topic, we'll let you know.
Kindly and gently.
Like in this specific example, I can talk about media over quick, and it's fine, even if there is already another mailing list for it.
Yeah, I think that's a particular area where, you know, the IETF is trying to figure out what it's doing. So I wouldn't want to get in the way of an organized activity of media over quick, but if there are things that we can do to help in discussion, I'd be happy to see it happen on the mailing list.
All right. Any other questions, comments, suggestions, complaints? Come on, people have to have complaints. All right. Oh, Jake.
One last, not complaint. I think you guys are doing great. But regarding the mailing list being last century, it made me wonder. There is a IETF Slack room. Should we? I'm not sure it'll be any better, but and it's I'm in a couple of rooms there. I think it's usually pretty quiet, but I'm not sure if anybody would prefer that, and I thought I'd just ask instead of leaving it in chat, or I think you got missed.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I would suggest if you don't mind dropping it in the notes, that would be great too. I think that we may want to do that. We're still going to wind up with the same question we had about the working group last call, which is if it doesn't happen on the mailing list, it didn't happen. So it may be we need a Slack channel and more comments on the mailing list. Glenn?
One observation. I wonder if part of the work we're doing here is to bridge in culturally folks that aren't traditionally IETF people, but coming from the video world. And I'm wondering if we need to help them adapt to what's appropriate on the IETF mailing lists. You know, if I'm new to an area, I probably want to adapt whatever the local culture is. And since we're fairly low volume and fairly new, we don't have necessarily like a demonstrable culture that they can plug right into. And I'm not sure how to solve it other than to say, you know, we're very welcoming and please post. Maybe those of us who are here already just need to take it upon ourselves to be a little more chatty on the list to demonstrate sort of a culture of openness and engagement.
Yep. That's a good suggestion, thanks. All right, well, unless anybody has any other business, I think we are at time and we are done. Kyle, anything else?
I don't have anything else.
Well then, thank you very much, Jake, for taking the notes, and thanks everyone who helped. Thanks to our presenters, and thanks to everyone engaging in discussion here. As always, it was, I thought, a useful meeting, and great. Have a great rest of IETF. Hope to see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.